So this first time proper album episode recovering Steely Dan. This is their album Asia, and the numbers, it comes in at number 46 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 6 in 1977, number 192 of all time, and it's number 63 of all time in Rolling Stone's Top 500 list.
Whoa!
This is highly regarded. This is Steely Dan's sixth studio album, recorded from late 1976 through middle of 1977. Released September 23rd, 1977. It reached the top 5 in the U.S. charts within 3 weeks, and it won a Grammy Award for the Best Engineering Recording. It was also one of the first American records to be certified platinum for sales over 1 million albums, so it did sell very well. So a little history on Steely Dan. The band was founded in 1971 at Bard College by two main members, Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. They met in 1967, a few years earlier at Bard College, and Donald Fagen was basically walking past a cafe, and he hears Beckett playing the electric guitar, and he was impressed by the playing, struck up a conversation, and found out that they liked the same kind of music, and decided to start playing and writing together. Donald Fagen was a keyboardist, or pianist, or one of the two, both, I guess. They started playing it. They formed a couple of different groups, including a band called Leather Canary. And I don't remember if we talked about this in our in our previous episode of The Cold Listen. But do you know who is the drummer of Leather Canary?
Ginger Rogers.
Phil Collins.
No, Chevy Chase.
Whoa. Okay.
Chevy Chase played with these guys for a brief period of time. Which I think Superfan Kevin told me about that after we did our Steely Dan episode, which made me laugh. So they played they were kind of a cover band essentially at this time. Donald Fagen really took to the beatnik life to the point with one of the musicians that would play with them noted that, quote, they never came out of their room. They stayed up all night. They looked like ghosts, black turtlenecks and skin so white it looked like yogurt. Absolutely no activity, chain smoking Lucky Stripes and dope. But hanging out, I guess, writing some music. After they graduate, they moved to Brooklyn in 1969, and they try to sell their music at the Brill Building, which we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. And their producer and musician,
shout out Carole King, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yep. And there's where producer and musician Kenny Vance from a band called Jay and the Americans took notice of Fagen and Becker. And they were invited to work on the soundtrack of the Richard Pryor film called "You've Got to Walk It Like You Talk It, or You'll Lose That Beat." Josh, do you know that film? I've never heard of that.
No.
No? Okay. Interesting title. So they record some demos, and they joined joined the touring band with Jay and the Americans for about a year and a half. And in 1971, Vance's associate Gary Katz moves to L.A. to become a staff producer for ABC Records, and he hires Fagen and Beckett as songwriters. And so they go out there, and Katz soon realizes that the songs that they're writing are way too complex for other artists to play, and they were encouraged to start their own band, which is what they did. So they gathered a couple of other musicians, including Denny Diaz, Jeff Baxter, drummer Jim Hodder, and a vocalist by the name of David Palmer. And he was basically called on to be vocalist because Donald Fagen had a little bit of stage fright and feelings that the label felt that his voice wasn't commercial enough. So they named the band Steely Dan. Do either of you know what this name comes from? Have you heard this story?
No.
I have not. No.
So it's named after a revolutionary steam-powered dildo mentioned in the William S. Burroughs novel Naked Lunch. So Steely Dan is a dildo.
Revolutionary
steam-powered dildo.
Steam-powered dildo. Okay. What makes it revolution? The fact that it's steam-powered?
I guess so. I don't.
Okay.
I
this
don't
is
know.
real or just made up by I
I think it's made up by Burroughs.
Okay,
I think
gotcha.
it's yeah. I've never read Burroughs, so but apparently it's from the book from Naked Lunch. So they're a dildo.
Okay.
So they released their debut album, Can't Buy a Thrill, in 1972, which we did cover on that Cold Listen Hot Take a couple months ago. And that's including the hit songs, Reelin' in the Years, Do It Again, and Dirty Work. And after the following tour, Becker and Katz decide that they liked Fagen's vocals actually better than David Palmer, and so Palmer leaves the band. Fagen becomes the main vocalist. Their second album, Countdown to Ecstasy, is that the one that we talked about that you mentioned earlier tonight, John?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was released in 1973. It's not as successful as Can't Buy a Thrill, and the band felt that it was kind of a rush job because they were recording it while they were on tour. And then they have their third album, Pretzel Logic, released in 74, which has the hit song Ricky Don't Lose That Number. You might have heard that before. Mm-hmm. And so they also add some new members to the band, including vocalist percussionist Royce Jones, vocalist and keyboardist Michael McDonald, and drummer Jeff Porcaro. And Jeff Porcaro would go on later to form Toto. Becker and Becker demanded perfection in the studio, often asking the musicians to record as many as 40 takes per track. And they actually became tired of touring around this time, and they decided to focus solely in the studio. So they're not touring anymore, which basically led all the other members of the band, with the exception of Diaz, to basically leave because they didn't agree with the direction of the band. And later on, Michael McDonald and Baxter went on to go on to join the Doobie Brothers. So we're getting, the term yacht rock started to get thrown around here a little bit, because this is kind of like the genre of Steely Dan and some of these other bands that these members are going into.
With
Yep.
that. Yep.
Very much so. So their fourth album, Katie Lied, was released in 75, included many studio musicians, and it sold well. But again, Fagen and Becker were disappointed in the results. Their fifth album, Royal Scam, was released in 76. That was their probably most guitar-oriented album. And finally, this brings us to Asia. And so this record really is seen as an album that pushed the band further into experimentation with different combinations of session players while playing longer songs and having more sophisticated compositions. The album is mainly known and praised for the immaculate production, the complex musical arrangements, and a fusion of jazz, pop, and R&B, kind of to the point where it's really all of those things, but it's also none of them, because it's like it's almost a genre within itself that they're doing with this record, which is one of the things that's kind of unique about it. It's very easy to listen to, but it also offers a lot of technical proficiency. And they did something interesting here, because within each song and each part that they wanted, it's one of those things where they always had the idea of the song in their mind. They knew how they wanted it to come out. And in order to get the sound, they knew that only certain musicians would be able to get there. So that's why they would have, on every song, they had like different musicians come in, because, somebody playing the guitar here or the saxophone there, whatever, might not be able to get the sound that they wanted in another track, because that track has a different feel. So they're using a ton of different musicians to really, get the specific sound that they want. Just a few more things. The album is actually titled after a Korean woman who married the brother of one of Fagen's high school friends. And the album cover features Japanese model and actress Sayoko Yamaguchi. To raise the profile, Katz encourages them to meet with the manager Irving Azoff. And with Azoff's connections, the album is sold at a discounted price, and that's one of the reasons it sold so fast. It was a cheaper record, and it was distributed pretty well. Within 3 weeks of its release, it reached the top 5 on the Billboard charts, and it ultimately peaked at number 3. And reviewing it for the album from 1977 for Rolling Stone, Michael Duffy said that, quote, "The conceptual framework of Steely Dan's music has shifted from the pretext of rock and roll towards a smoother, awesomely clean, and calculated mutation of various rock, pop, and jazz idioms, while their lyrics remain as pleasantly obtuse and cynical as ever." So that's a little history of Asia, and I think it's John's turn to start his hot take on this, if it is a hot take. John.
God damn, Matt, your bios go so long, you steal like 90% of what I'm going to say about these albums before I can even say
There's
it. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, for sure. It's like, all right, so let me think of something I'm going to say that's not in here. Okay, so.
Well, John, you said, what did you say? You were shook. You texted us and said you were shook by this record.
So let me work backwards. Here's why. Because I'm super familiar with Can't Buy a Thrill, right? That's the Steely Dan that I think of as Steely Dan, right? And I will fully admit that outside of knowing that whole album, I know very little about Steely Dan. I have preconceived notions, but I also know that Steely Dan's like 6 different sounds and bands depending on what time we're talking about, right? So I went into this one not really. The only song I knew was Josie, which is an awesome song, and I knew it was an awesome song. It's at the end right there. But the rest I wasn't sure. But then I quickly realized that, like, I do know bits and pieces of this album all over the place.
Yeah.
And why I was shook was because Black Cow started
Yes.
playing, and immediately Peter Guns and, like, Uptown Baby, like, the sample, I was like, it's a Steely Dan. How about that? So probably people listening to this who may be from the 70s and stuff, or other folk, like, there is a famous 90s hip-hop song that, late 90s, early 2000s, called Uptown Baby, that has the exact sample of the first, like, 30 seconds of this. And so I had to stop and actually listen to that song because it's awesome. Lord Tariq and Peter Guns, I think, is the artist, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I was shook by that. I was like, wow, Steely Dan sample there. And then Peg plays, and I'm like, well, there's another very well-known opening that I've heard all over the place at different times. And obviously I know Josie is another one that and you hear those bits and pieces, like, everywhere from hip-hop samples to, like, intros on things to, like, stadium music. It's kind of weird how omnipresent those things are. So that was kind of my first thing. I was like, oh, how about that? I know more about this even by not knowing it than I think I do. Musically, the bass is wonderful on this album. I mean, the bass is like a funk bass on this album, and it stands out on every single track. I always was able to place it. I'm a little bit of a bass aficionado, so huge strength there. I am hesitant to use the term yacht rock because it has negative connotations. Like, this is restaurant quality yacht rock, but it is yacht rock to the point where I'm listening to this and I'm like, that sounds exactly like Michael McDonald of all people, but Michael McDonald's not in Steely Dan. And then I started talking to my dad, who I mentioned earlier, you know, like, having seen the album covers for Steely Dan albums. And I said, yeah, I'm listening to it. I'm like, it's just like yacht rock, like Michael McDonald. He's like, well, yeah, Michael McDonald was in Steely Dan. I said,
Yeah.
What? So I looked and I'm like, damn if it isn't. And so that was Michael McDonald, I heard. And yeah, I mean, when you think about it, so few people, you know, like, you know, that, like, it's like he's immediately recognized.
And I think all that the vocal, the chorus, and Peg, it's the harmonies are all. It's like Michael McDonald. It's all him.
Clearly
exactly.
all him,
yes.
because
Yep.
who else sings like that except if you're imitating? You know, the whole So the whole thing, and I'm like, I just thought he was, you know, by himself, and then the Doobie Brothers. I had no idea to stop in Steely Dan along the way. But yeah, we're in like Transformers of yacht rock right here. They're all Donald Fagen, you know, Michael McDonald, like different people, members of, you said Toto, right?
Jeff Porcaro.
Jeff Porcaro. Yeah, it's like, come on, it's like everybody right there. It's like a yacht rock episode. But with that being said, it's a very pleasant sound. I would say edgeless would be a description, which is what yacht rock is. Yeah. Once again, I was struck by the fact that all 3 of our albums tonight represent sort of the absolute opposite of, like, the punk and stuff that we're doing. You know what I mean? Whether it be like electronic music, like yacht rockish, proggy elements, you know, kind of jazzy, which is what this is, or that, like, real prog rock, hard rock sound, you know, like, they all represent other pieces of the music industry as opposed to the, like, youth driven one, you know, that, like, early 20s teenager visceral in your gut. So once again, this didn't really hit me in my innards. It wasn't soulless. It just kind of it walks that line carefully between music you can put in and vibe to and music you can put on the dentist's office. It's not that. You know what I mean? This definitely is more vibey than that, but it's a delicate line you have to walk because there's a lot of cliches in, like, that music with the sax that if you just do it the wrong way, it can lean into, you know, like, easy listening type stuff. But it didn't get there for me. And so I would say that I liked this album. Didn't love the album, but once again, much like with Rush, I appreciate the complexity of what they're doing, whether it be the bass lines or the layered vocals or the sax or the guitar work. I like the fact that there's just bits and pieces in each album. You can pick them apart. It would be an interesting album to listen to in isolated audio, like what each of the things are doing. Because there's a lot. There's also like there's whistles and different stuff in here, like isolated sounds as well. And so yeah, I would say slight recommend. Very different than the first album we did was more jazzy. It was more jazzy and sort of popish and a real pleasant listen, you know, like, but a pop album. This kind of is pop in its own way and jazz infused, but coming from a different standpoint. And so I'll back up for a little bit and let Josh and Matt go.
Yeah, this is like the head exploding emoji for me. I couldn't like comprehend this album the first time I listened to it. I feel like Steely Dan is like really has a dedicated following in some, at least in like the Twitter people that I follow. I think there's a lot of like rumblings of Steely Dan fans, and I know about them from the Yacht Rock guys and Beyond Yacht Rock. And yeah, this is kind of, Steely Dan's like one of those seminal like definitions of what yacht rock is. This, like Matt said, this album is like incredibly technical on some level. The production is immaculate. I noticed that right off the bat, and it is so smooth. I mean, it kind of won me over by the end, because it's just like, it takes it to like this level that I didn't think was possible. There's like so much going on, but it's also like easy listening, or easy to listen to, and the singing is really smooth and like and soulful, and songs like Deacon Blues, the lyrics are kind of like, I don't know how to describe the lyrics. They're like fun, but like also like a little jokey, and then also and knowing, and I don't know. They're just they fit the.
Well, they're kind of sad.
Yeah,
because it's about like them being rock stars, but not really wanting to be rock stars, and kind of like, you know, he calls himself a loser, and it's like the downside of like this life, and it's not a happy song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. But I think the lyrics kind of carry throughout as well, that in terms of there's a complexity to the lyrics as well. I enjoyed the music. It's almost like I need to listen to this album more to kind of appreciate it, or get to the level, or maybe hear more Steely Dan. I think there's other albums that are also like Royal Scam that are kind of well regarded as well. I really like the harmonizing, the really good electric piano on this album. It is weird how it has that quality of like jazz and pop and like some other like quality genre of music. They do a really good job of combining all of those, and this album is like singularly different as a result of that. It's hard to make a comparison to other anything else that we've listened to in the 70s as a result of that. It's kind of crazy. I think it's a fun listen, actually. I'm gonna recommend it, but I also need to like I think I'm still processing it as well. It's interesting. There's also some like funk soul qualities into it. They just really throw everything and are able to combine stuff in interesting ways.
Yeah, they write really interesting lyrics too. Like, you wouldn't know what Josie's about unless you listen really carefully, and then you realize, oh, it's about, you know, a girl who gets around a little bit, but like not in a shaming way, more in like a admiring way a little bit, I guess, with a wink and a nod, I guess. And you know, when there's all these women's names as songs, but they're all very different. You'd think they'd be love songs, right? But each of them, Peg comes from a totally different standpoint, you know, of a male perspective, and then Asia is, lyrically, it's just interesting the type of songs they write. I was interested.
All right. So
you love this album, man.
So Steely Dan, like, no, I went into this album knowing that like I don't like Steely Dan, or that's my narrative, right? And I've got and It's kind of starts with I have two good friends from high school that are like super into them, particularly this album, and I would and it just came out of nowhere. I just like went to go visit them. He started playing. It's like, this is great, and I'm listening to it, going, just like what John's saying, like zero edge. Like it's just like, it's glorified elevator music. It's like, it's easy listening stuff, it's just, and it was mostly around the production. So I did listen to it a little bit, and I was just like, I can't get down with this. This is just, and it was mainly because of the production, So I knew going into this week that I would be challenged by that. And I certainly was, in the very beginning, I'm listening to the record the first time, and it all kind of blended together. I remember just thinking, God, it's just like one, and it's because of the production. It is like this very, God, the keyboards that they're using here. It's just, I don't know how to describe, but it's like stuff that you'd hear like in a mall or something, just kind of like an inoffensive type sound that's just kind of there. And I was just like, man, this, and I could pinpoint the musicianship because, there's the drumming on here. There's some really cool drumming you could pick up on. And John said, yeah, the bass has some cool parts. So I was able to pick that up. But I was always thinking, well, if the production was different, if they had a little bit more of an edge to it, if they used like a different filter or something like that, like maybe I would like this better. And then I just listened to it more and I let it be what it is. And I think you're right, Josh. I think as you listen to this, the more I listen to it anyway, the more I let it be what it is, and kind of ended up liking it, oddly enough. So I'm kind of eating some crow here because I've panned Steely Dan for many years, and I kind of get it now. I'm not to the level that my buddies are, or to where other people are, because you're right, Josh. I think that this is something that they have a big following, and they're people that love Steely Dan. I'm not going to say that I am there, but I think top to bottom, this is a very good album. It was getting used to that production, being okay with it, I think is what I was actually able to do. I listened to this album a lot of times, and I think as time went on, I liked it more and more. I agree with you, John. I think Josie's a great song. Peg is I think I knew Peg before that. That seemed like that was, probably more of a song that I heard more, maybe through the radio or whatever. It was one of the singles on here. But yes, there's definitely funk. Home at Last has got a really good funk groove going on to it. Josie does as well. I kind of just let it be what it is. I kind of like it. So there's no edge here at all. And it is that yacht rock thing, and that's a sound that, it's not something I want to hear a whole lot in music. It's certainly not a go-to, but I think with doing this little project here and kind of, putting myself in this position where I'm like, well, I got to listen to this more. That's what I do with these albums when we do the proper, episodes. And I gained a greater appreciation for it. So I apologize, Steely Dan. You're not terrible. It's just I needed some time with this, and who knows, maybe this is something that I'll, won't disregard so quickly hearing that sound, because this isn't just something that they're doing. This is it's a 70s sounding album, with the keys that they're doing here.
It's like, is smooth a positive or a negative? And it's like, the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's both. Exactly. Yes. That's yes. So, but I think, like with a lot of things, I mean, with familiarity comes a little greater understanding, I think. And I think that that's probably a good way of putting this here. Because if I'm not putting myself in a position like in a podcast where I want to listen to it multiple times to really get it, if I heard this album once or like the first 2 times, no way, this album sucks, right? Or like, that sucks, but just like, I just have zero interest in this. And by the end of this week, I have interest in this. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up.
I cannot stress enough how different this album sounds compared to the first one we listened to. Also, it was like shocking when I first listened to it. I was like, "What? This is a different band."
Yeah, and I would still probably rather listen to that one. I think that because I listened to it this week, and it's more of a I like the structure of that better. Just not saying that it is better, because this is probably more. I mean, they spent a lot of time producing this and like getting everything just perfect. So this is probably still a better album, but I think as enjoyment goes, I would rather put on Can't Buy a Thrill than this. But at the end of the day, I kind of ended up liking them both.
I want to know what like Steely Dan super fans like what they respond to on the.
It's just the same thing, that it's the virtuoso musician. It's the complexity of the compositions. It's
so are they
really,
also Rush fans? It's like, is there an overlap there?
potentially? It's a very different sound though, but I mean, there's
Yeah.
similarities. I'd say.
Yeah, probably the smoothness too, like we talked about, but it's that sound that's kind of like I said, it's I could see someone saying they groove or get into a vibe to the Steely Dan like sound, which
This is like a good pool party album to play.
It was described.
Yeah,
I did see
I
that
wouldn't play it at
documentary.
my pool party, but like, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah,
I did see that documentary, the classic albums that you had told me about, Josh, and a lot of people were saying this is like one of the descriptions of this album. It's a very LA album, because the album was recorded in LA, even though they were from New York, and that they were just indicating that this album could only have been made in LA, because that's exactly what the sound of LA was at the time, or whatever.
it's funny
So-
because I always think of an LA album as like code for Coke, but this doesn't seem like a Coke album. So like,
Yeah, I didn't read too much about them getting big into the drugs at all, except from
Nah, it's
smoking
absolutely
weed. But so yeah. So any other? I have a couple postscripts here, because this is the last time we're covering Steely Dan.
Okay.
go
Yeah,
for
go
it.
for
I think John, unless you have it like Gaucho
I don't
in the
think
80s.
so. I don't
So
think we're covering
yeah,
it.
so they do the next album. It's Gaucho, and the production, the recording of that did not go smoothly. There was a couple of tragedies that happened. Becker's girlfriend actually died of a drug overdose, and he was actually later struck by a car that really injured his leg. So, and there were some other tensions in the studio. So they broke up for over 10 years. And Becker moves to Maui and becomes an avocado farmer. And Fagan,
Oh wow.
yeah, and Fagan released a studio album and also wrote the score to the movie Bright Lights, Big City. They kind of do their own productions here and there along the way, but they reunite in 1993 for a tour. Released an album in 2000 called Two Against Nature, which won 4 Grammys, including Album of the Year, beating out Paul Simon's You're the One, Beck's Midnight Vultures, Eminem's The Marshall Mathers LP, and Radiohead's Kid A for Album of the Year in 2000.
Wow. Okay, Grammys.
Yeah. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001, and they did continue playing together until Becker's death on September 3rd, 2017, from complications due to esophageal cancer. And the band's carrying on today with Donald Fagen being the only true member. So yeah, Steely Dan, band I kind of grew to like, I guess, to some extent. I'm not like over the moon, but like everybody else is, but I definitely got a greater appreciation for them. So thank you, Combing the Stacks.